Okay, so morning everyone. My name is Giuseppe Martinico. I teach comparative public law at the Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna, and I'm also the director of the Sant'Anna Legal Studies program together with Giacomo Delle Donne and Filippo Fontanelli, and I'm very happy to welcome you all for this fourth conference jointly organized with the Confucius Institute of Pisa. This is going to be a webinar devoted to the EU-China Comprehensive Agreement on Investment and its impact on the Belt and Road Initiative. We know that the EU-China relationship is at a crossroads. Today, we also having the EU-China meeting. So it's a very important period for the EU-China relationship. And we decided to devote this webinar to this topic. I'm very happy to give the floor now to the director of the Confucius Institute in Pisa, Professor Huang Yunlin. Ready to where you are. Thank you for joining us, for the support of the Institute to this initiative.
Thank you, Professor Martinico. Good afternoon, my friends there in China, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor to be here with you. I'm also very happy that we can gather together even during the pandemic period. And the most important thing is that today we can talk about some issues about the cooperation between China and the EU. I remember last time when we worked together at the end of the year of 2020. I would say how time flies, yes. Even during such a hard time, still we need to move forward. Yes, and we have noticed actually we have done a very good job. Yeah, the practical cooperation between China and the EU actually has made significant progress. It is reported, despite COVID-19, economic cooperation has progressed with the trade volume between China and the EU has increased a lot. Compared that in 2020, 2029 has a rise of around 19%. Okay, and the trade volume between China and Italy is even bigger, a rise of more than 30%. I think that, yeah, we have done a very good job. So despite the COVID-19, we continue our dialogue, yeah, between the scholars from the West and the East. And I'm very happy that Confucius Institute in Pisa has played a role in making such a dialogue. So we all believe that communication is the power. Let's just seek our common interests and manage our differences properly. And let's hope that China and the EU can strengthen cooperation and develop a sound and steady relationship. Yeah, I'm very happy to welcome all of you to join this workshop. I will wish this workshop a success. Thank you.
Thanks indeed for your very kind words and for your support. Indeed, I think that this is one of those topics in which we really need, more cooperation between the EU and China, also to shape, a better international system. We know that the international system is now living a terrible crisis. So I think that we need to find, a common ground, and indeed, the EU and China can play a very fundamental role. I want to also say that unfortunately the director of the DIRPOLIS stands for Law, Politics and Development. It is one of the department, one of the institutes of the Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna. Unfortunately, our director Gaetano Morgante cannot join us this morning, but I would like to, of course, say that she's very happy, to have the institute involved in this initiative, and the policy institute has been very active in events like this. We indeed think that trying to gather scholars with different backgrounds and with different interests is an added value to the kind of scientific cooperation and activities that we carried out at the institute. So I'm very happy to give now the floor to a stellar scholar, a fantastic colleague, a big name in this field. My friend Professor Elaine Fahey. She's professor of law, Jean Monnet Chair in Law and in Transatlantic Relations at the City University of London. And she also was a Max Weber Fellow at the European University in Florence, assistant lecturer in law in Ireland at the Dublin Institute of Technology. She was Emile Noel Fellow at the NYU in New York. She was a visiting professor in many places, including the University Law School, the Keio University Law School in Tokyo. She also worked in Amsterdam. She's indeed the eminent global scholar, and she has been writing very important things about the global legal dynamics, let's call this way, including a book. She authored in 2020. She edited. It is called Framing Convergence with Global Order, the EU and the World, and she just submitted the very final version of another volume, a monograph, and I know that she's gonna say something about this book, so I'm not going to give spoilers. But I do recommend, the reading of her works that are extremely rich, and I always learn a lot from her. So, Elaine, thanks indeed for joining us. It's a great honor. This means a lot to me, so I'm very happy that you managed to join us, and I give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Giuseppe, for a very warm welcome. I'm blushing here in London at all of your praises. That they're too much. I'm just going to try and share my screen with you. If you give me one moment, everything should be okay. I'm on 4G, just in case, because my Wi-Fi is down. Can you hear me and see me okay?
Yeah.
Can you? Yeah.
Very good.
Sorry. Can you still see me?
Yeah, we see the PowerPoint.
You see the PowerPoint, okay.
Yeah. So
yeah, that's okay now, is it?
No, but if try with slideshow, and I think that you should be able to.
Is that not a slideshow?
Not yet.
Just try it once more, because
yeah. Otherwise, I'm happy to help because I have your.
You have my slideshow, but how do I unshare? Let me just try it. Stop sharing. I'll just try it once more. Sorry, 1 second. I don't know. Share.
No worries.
Yeah, I think this should be good. Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Indeed. Great.
Okay, but can you?
Yeah.
Can you see me okay, or have I turned off my video? No.
No, it's perfect. We see the PowerPoint, and I think it's okay.
Yeah. Great. So thank you so much to you all for this really kind invitation, and especially to Giuseppe for this extremely warm welcome. It's a really fantastic program you have today, and as usual. So I think you're doing extremely important work, and I'm really honored to participate in your work in this regard, and in this collaboration with the Confucius Institute. I think that you couldn't get a more interesting time in history to speak about EU-Asian relations generally, but particularly EU-China relations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak for a short period of time, and I'd like to very much chat with you all and to hear your views on these issues. And the topic of the talk that I wanted to outline to you was an EU-Asia relations reverse convergence of values. And as I said, I'll try and speak a lot about China, but I think there's a lot of very interesting questions. And as Giuseppe said just earlier, I have a new book coming out, which is the EU as a global digital actor. And the book is coming out with Heart, I think around September or October this year, miraculously. And the full title is on institutionalizing global data protection, trade and cybersecurity. So I just thought this would be, it's possibly a very nice topic for this kind of a talk. So where I come from, I just wanted to explain the background to it all and my thinking on all of this. My view of the world, or of the EU as it stands, is that the EU is very much always trying to seek global convergence, and it usually tries to converge around institutions. And so you might say, well, what do you mean by that? Well, from the International Criminal Court to the Multilateral Investment Court to, I don't know, international regulatory cooperation, WTO reforms, EU-US Trade and Technology Council developments, there's literally no shortage of developments for us to look at the idea as an entity that is really always converging around institutions in the international legal order. And you might say that this challenges classic international relations theory, people like Bob Keohane in the 1980s, of First World War, post-World War hegemony of the US, or Second World War, the US driving the global legal order, but don't create new institutions, just leave them as they are, and the world will be okay, right? This is classic IOR theory. Don't create new institutions, leave the ones you have alone. And the EU has fundamentally challenged that by always being in the background, being the cheerleader and saying, let's have more, let's have new ones, or let's reform institutions. And so the book that I have just written is about these questions. And the book generally looks at the EU as a global data actor, as a digital trade actor, as a cyber actor. And I have 3 case studies I'll outline now, but it's very much a book, not just about data, but a broader thing about the EU being a global entity, a global legal actor. And the book, I've just received proofs of the book. It looks something like this. I try to divide each chapter into a range of sub-questions, but to keep the overarching idea straightforward enough. So I started writing this book before lockdown, and I thought back then that I had 3 case studies. So the idea was that I would study 3 entities, the US as something much closer to the EU legal order, Japan something much further from the EU legal order, and China, I thought, it's just incomparable. I can't say that, I can't find this. I have to have a very different type of case study. So for me, China was something else. And that was the kind of the broad thrust of what I wanted to do in the case studies. And as Giuseppe, more than kindly outlined just a few moments ago, I was doing another book project for a long time on the EU as a global convergence actor. And I think it's a good explanation for anyone who wants to understand how weird or odd or difficult or awkward the EU is. And I would frame it as such that the EU is always leading the spirit of convergence with public international, convergence with institutions, but always doing it through divergence, slightly different, somewhat another means of doing things. So from defense to financial services to labor standards, territoriality, unilateralism, global supply chains, there's literally no shortage of examples of the EU always speaking the language of convergence, but doing so in different ways. Now you may say, why are you telling me this? But I think it's a good kind of way to explain what I want to do. But in the book project that I've just done, the EU as a global digital actor, I'm looking at how the EU advances EU global data flows and digital trade through this idea of institutionalization. And I look at data transfers, data protection, trade and cybersecurity And I'm generally looking at 3 case studies of scale. So scale matters in data and in trade. You know, the bigger you are, the more significant it is in global governance terms. So I look at the 3 largest scale data flow regimes I think I can find, or wannabe regimes. So the EU and US, you know, 1 billion people, you know, sharing a huge amount of legal agreements, up to about 8 agreements. Another one recently agreed. The EU-Japan is the 3rd largest safe flow of data regime in the world, and EU-China, obviously potentially one of the most significant areas of the planet. And I'm looking at forms, actors, and processes. And just to reiterate that there's no global or no universal formula for data in a trade agreement, you know, even though it covers things from cybersecurity to intellectual property, transparency, frictionless movement of workers. There's no global privacy treaty. There's no global cybersecurity treaty. And obviously, the EU has had incredible first mover advantage in lots of data related areas. But I say we need to stop just focusing upon the GDPR. The EU does lots of other very interesting things, including as to cybersecurity, digital trade, and we need to look at cross-cutting areas of data governance, transfer, digital trade, cyber regulation, law enforcement, the Internet of Things, and so on. So I tried to touch on a whole range of these things, but I want you to question this kind of, what is a holistic focus in data? How much are we narrowing our views by just focusing upon GDPR issues, which are obviously incredibly important. I don't discount it, and it's not, you know, it's incredibly significant. But there is also a culture of protectionism when we study just the GDPR and its effects, because you know, it's a very different type of regime. Okie dokie, and just to outline a little bit more about kind of the theoretical framework. I mean, it's a descriptive claim that I make. It's not necessarily a normative claim, but I say that institution building is, and don't worry, I'm getting to EU-China issues very, very shortly, but you know, institution building is a foundation of the EU policy. The EU is, maybe it's a very EU-centric or European idea, but I still say it's important to say the EU is probably globally unique in its commitment to institutionalization, be it internally and externally. Why? Because the EU has a longer term vision of society through institutions. And it's very much a liberal, non-realist view to say that the EU has a consistent history of promoting and nudging multilateralism, as I explained in the advance at the beginning, at the outset, and it generally, you know, converges with public international law. Okay, but it all gets very interesting in recent times to say all these things, because we now live in the era of digital sovereignty and strategic autonomy. And in fact, the EU is literally taking on the China's Belt and Road Initiative in recent times. So I think the framing of all of this is far from neutral. It's an extremely, you know, significant question about how we understand the broader context of institutionalization. Okay, so matters get very interesting when around 2019, China introduces a very interesting cybersecurity law, which builds upon lots of non-binding measures, and it largely incorporates lots of key GDPR concepts into Chinese law, particularly that data must be relevant, adequate, relevant, not excessive for the purposes for which it's processed. I think it's the law of 2017 that comes into force in 2019. And then there's another very significant, interesting law coming from China, the Personal Information Protection law, taking effect in November of last year, which is merely a framework law rather than a comprehensive or direct attempt at privacy lawmaking, but there's many very important features in it. For example, it outlaws automated decision-making for price discrimination, and it tries to protect consumers from differentiated treatment. Now, these are very interesting you know, demonstrations of shifts in values, in norms, and in ideas. And if we look at scholars such as Anu Bradford, who has looked at some of this earlier law in much detail, she would argue that there's no such thing really as a reverse Brussels effect, that, you know, you could not say that there was really a commitment to EU-style privacy in China. For example, you know, still using facial recognition techniques, or and that just because you have EU law on your books did not translate it to EU law in action in a meaningful way. You know, Privacy International still ranked China very low on the freedom from surveillance at the start of the 21st century, or its social credit system and so on. These are not things that would be possible under EU law, I think, goes the argument. However, I make the case that there's been an extraordinary legalization taking place just in the last few months in the Chinese legal order and beyond. And whether it's a very slow or rapid legalization, I think, is a more complex question to discuss with our colleagues from the Confucius Institute. But if we look at the start of the last few months, just seeing a civil code being brought into force in Chinese law, seeing China join and lead the regional comprehensive economic partnership from 2022, already very significant, also applying to be part of CPTPP, this extremely enormous trade agreement that ultimately the Trump administration pulled out of. All the other countries in the Asia-Pacific region went forward with it, but it had the intention to exclude China to some degree at the start, and now China is very much from the inside looking to be a key player in all of this. Now, just a few months, a very short period of time before lockdown, there was this incredible commission paper on trying to understand the Chinese economy from a legal perspective, looking at the trade defense investigation, looking at the SOEs, state-owned enterprises, and what distortions should be understood as. And it's a very, very lengthy, detailed report to saying how hard it is to understand the state in China, and that there are many reasons for adopting trade defense instruments. I'm not doing it any justice, whatever, but you see the date of the top of this document, on the top right hand side, is the December 2017. And of course, in the meanwhile, there was this huge question about so many EU member states participating in the Belt and Road Initiative, and Giuseppe's done some fantastic work in this, but we still don't really know how many countries globally participated in it. The data is very difficult to discern. It's not very transparent, and there were, many member states participating in this. So I think in global governance terms, the Belt and Road Initiative was under and is understood to be law light, institution light, top down, treaty light, evading lots of law, very different to the EU's approach to multilateralism at the time, right? This was, shall we say, this is the past thinking that the Belt and Road Initiative was something which was an anathema to EU values, remember? And all of a sudden, in the last few months, we've seen a huge shift in the EU's approach to this, instead to adopt its own Belt and Road Initiative, the Global Gateway Initiative. And you'll see a chart on the right-hand side from a German television program showing that the EU, its value would only be at least a third of the Belt and Road Initiative, but largely in the same way comprised similarly from investments, a similar law-light institution-like regime the EU itself decides to propose. And of course, the extraordinary things don't stop there. We see after at least 7 years of negotiations on a comprehensive agreement and investment to replace 25 bilateral investment treaties and to go beyond traditional investment protection, there is an agreement in principle in December 2020. And we also see in 2020 a very significant bilateral agreement between the EU and China on geographical indications. So in a very important area of IP law, particularly for the EU, one of its most cherished cultural domains, cultural legal domains, GIs, protecting very important things culturally in the gourmet palate of Europe. So we all know probably to some extent that the CAI was landmark in some expense or just totally new territory. And others would say, well, not really at all. The CAI is boring. As a legal agreement, it's not even a trade agreement. It's just investment. But I would argue that it still is a very innovative form of agreement, which was trying to liberalize investment, albeit just investment, but still it was doing this through an institutionalized and embedded regulatory framework. And of course, there's lots of controversies about it, lots of human rights issues, sanctions. We don't need to go into that. But what is very interesting is the legal detail on the institutional provisions. And for an agreement that's alleged to be so singular, so unique, so specific, there are still a whole range of very interesting provisions, references to investment committees, referencing dialogues, working groups, final provisions referencing dialogue with non-state stakeholders. And these are all classic EU means of formulating trade agreements. And these are very much the EU's modus operandi to engage with a wide variety of stakeholders, government, private sector parties, and to dialogue with them all. And we might say that this is a very good example of another entity taking place, perhaps the broader convergence of China with international economic law, but also World Trade Organization law. And in fact, we might see the work of people like the fantastic work of Greg Schaefer, showing the vast amount of people who have been hired in China and schooled to become WTO lawyers, international economic lawyers, to institutionalize the bureaucracy of WTO law, to learn how the system works, to be part of all the litigation, to litigate, to be at the heart of what is happening. So we might say that China continues to converge perhaps around Western models, but also to institutionalize somewhat successfully, if not very successfully, within its own legal order and within international organizations. So this dual-fold approach. So whatever about the complexities of understanding values in this context, we might say that the deeper bureaucratization is taking effect. So I don't want to talk for too long in order to leave time for discussion and to dialogue with you on all of these issues. But I think my framing of all of these questions seems to be that the Chinese legal order and its body politic is extremely open to forms of European institutionalization. And we might frame this as a form of reverse convergence, be it of norms, values, actors, principles, ideas. And perhaps we might say that the limited convergence with EU law initially, on some level, such as with the GDPR initially, did not equate with EU values. So to try and frame it so starkly in those terms, I don't think is very helpful. I don't think that that is accurate because so much else has taken place. Now, initially, we can also say that EU-China relations were a very significant study of law-light institutional regimes. But I think it's very important to say that significant multilateralism, institutionalization, and legalization are emerging. And they're actually emerging at a very rapid pace. If you ask people like me, if you ask other people who are looking for shorter term gains or shorter term solutions, that perhaps is more problematic. But if we see the longer trajectory here, as evidenced by people like Greg Schaefer, but also witnessing how, in a period from 2017, the formulation of China in trade defense terms looks so radically different. I think it's very important to say that EU-China relations have gone from being technically the furthest away from the EU legal order and the least institutionalized to something that looks very different, something that has infrastructure, and something that is, we're witnessing legalization that indicates that much more convergence may be well in sight. But I would say that it is very important to unpack institutionalization, to unpack questions of values from mere legal transparency. So I don't need to, especially people like Giuseppe who are outstanding comparative lawyers will tell us that it's very dangerous study, very difficult to study legal transplants per se.
Okay, so I think that we can try to have a Q&A sessions based on your brilliant speech. I really want to say thank you, for the extreme rich presentation you gave us in less than 20 minutes. So that was a fantastic presentation. You managed to cover so many issues, and we are really grateful. So if there are questions or comments for Elaine, please write in the chat. then I'll give you the floor. And in the meantime, I would like to, ask a couple of questions. The first one is about how China, as an international legal actor that has been depicted recently, remember that some authors have described China, especially after the first years of its WTO membership, as a rule taker, right? So, describing in this way how the Chinese legal system was trying to adapt, to the pressure, coming from the WTO system. But more recently, other scholars have instead argued that China would be more now a sort of a rule shaker. So China would try now to reshape, the international economic legal system and trying to, present, some inputs that could be indeed, digested and taken by this international organization, so including the, WTO. Can we try to frame, the relationship between the EU and China in light of these two, let's say, readings of how China has acted as an international legal player? Do you think that in this area China has acted more as a rule taker or more as a rule shaker? And this is my first question. My second question, my second comment is about indeed the importance of a proper comparative analysis in studying the convergence, because as you said, that convergence is a goal. At the same time, we start from very different backgrounds, so it is of course, reasonable that both the actors involved in this process, try to adapt their legal system without, however, renouncing their legal identity. So you referred in the very last part of your speech to legal transplants. Do you think that this debate is useful to describe, what is happening in China, or do you think that a proper comparative analysis should, avoid, this kind of reference to legal transplant, as legal transplant actually risk missing the complexity of the kind of legal operation that is needed in order to create that, common institutions, so a common ground with the EU on this matter. I don't know if my questions are clear, Elaine. Let me know. I will be happy to know what you think.
Thanks for the fantastic questions, Giuseppe. I'm so sorry about the internet. I have no idea what just happened. I went in and out the 4G, so thank you for your patience with me, and thank you for
Don't worry,
they're really outstanding. Yeah, fantastic questions. I think this is a really important point of global governance law, because being the first question on rule taking, because traditionally it's not much global governance scholarship. It's from lawyers, right? It's mostly non-legal, and they would say the rule makers in the world are generally the EU, US, and China. Like it's repeated in so many countless textbooks. So I think you're absolutely right. Like this question of takers and shapers needs a lot more nuance and legal analysis. And I would say it's very hard to say that China is a rule maker in trade. It still is, it's trying to bureaucratize. It still is trying to, but it is shaping as it engages, right? It's litigating left, right, and center so many things. But then, of course, WTO dispute settlement is in its own, state of horror and so on. So, it's very hard to be a rule shaper if you don't have the legal tools, right? And so we're witnessing a massive engage. It's a bit like Brexit. It's impossible to lead if you don't have the capacity to lead. So I think it's very interesting to see what China is doing right now in trade terms, and its shift, the civil code and so on. I think is a very important shift. But I I think you're right to raise the question of terminology, because I think that is pivotal to, like, lawyers are very much ignored in a lot of these debates. And from a legal perspective, it's very nuanced and much more complex. And that maybe leads to your second question. I think the comparative law point is very important here because, you know, as far as I understand it, in the Chinese Civil Code, there's been a tremendous amount of, particularly continental European, you know, influence, and it's very difficult to ignore that, and it's very difficult to ignore the openness of the Chinese in their legal order to so many, you know, international ideas. And so I think it's I don't have the answer to your second question. It's too important and difficult, or perhaps some Chinese colleagues have more insights in this, because it must be very interesting to be a lawyer in China right now, to be witnessing all of these shifts, to be witnessing you know, clearly a lot of change, and change is difficult to, you know, on this scale. So I think convergence is not necessarily a useful thing to do, right? If you're a practical person or a practical lawyer, you probably, you know, convergence isn't necessarily the most helpful term. It's very vague or whatever, but I think we need concepts to frame the broader, you know, tapestry, and maybe if you're a Chinese lawyer, convergence doesn't mean much right now, whereas if you're European, it probably, you know, it speaks to you a lot more. So I would say there's a lot of analysis that needs to be done. And yeah, fantastic questions. Thank you so much, Giuseppe. And I'm sorry again about my internet. This has never happened to me in 2 years of lockdown. So thank you very much.
Don't worry. Thanks indeed. So I don't know if there are other comments or questions for Elaine. Please don't be shy. So we have so many experts in the audience, but then they will become my speakers during the panel. So Eric, Imad, so I don't know if they want to say something. There was a question that perhaps? No. Okay. So I was very curious about another point, because can we say that to a certain extent the new, I mean, interest in this comprehensive agreement, which is now, I mean, somehow frozen, but can we say that the new interest in this comprehensive agreement was an attempt, I mean, to answer the issues or the concerns, let's say, created by the bilateral systems characterizing the Belt and Road Initiative? Because I see a pattern there. I remember when Italy signed the memorandum of understanding with China, and there were many concerns. I mean, and indeed, in the text of the memorandum of understanding with China, Italy included some clauses clarifying that nothing in this memorandum could affect the international obligations and the EU law obligations, of course. So then there were other memoranda like this, and I thought at the beginning that the comprehensive agreement was an attempt, I mean, made by the EU to try to centralize the question, avoiding the indeed, I mean, creation of different bilateral agreements at national level that could jeopardize, I mean, the effectiveness and unity of the national, let's say, activity, especially when involving EU law matters. So at the same time, I'm aware of the fact that concluding in this way will be perhaps, I mean, too easy, and perhaps, I mean, the comprehensive agreement can be seen together with the Belt and Road Initiative. So there are also, I mean, margins for the sort of interaction between these two initiatives. What's your feeling? I mean, how can you frame, how can we frame actually the potential interaction between the comprehensive agreement and the Belt and Road Initiative? And then another minor point is I noticed that you were referred to the word institutionalization. And I remember that one of the main features of the Belt and Road Initiative, according at least to some colleagues, to some very important, colleagues like Wang, he wrote a lot on that, was that actually China was precisely avoiding the creation of new institutions by relying on soft law measures in order to indeed avoid an excessive institutionalization of its relationship with the European countries. So do you think that the comprehensive agreement can represent a game changer? Do you think that it could work in order to create, some, let's say, common institutions, as you said? I know that these are very broad questions. I don't want to, feel free, to avoid them if they don't make sense. But I would like to, know what did you think, and these were my thoughts, okay? So thanks indeed again, Elaine, and let's see if our colleagues want to jump in for other comments. Otherwise, I will give you, yeah.
Thanks, Giuseppe. I think is it someone else has their hand up there? Is it your colleague?
All right, so I don't see the end up. Okay.
Imad, is it Imad? Hi.
Imad. All right, Imad. So feel free to jump in. Imad. No, I don't see him.
Sorry,
yeah.
I took it out. I took it out and I was muted. So thanks a lot for the presentation. It was very informative and very detailed with all the concerning China and the EU. I have a couple of questions here. One institutional, the second one more sort of in a general broader sense. The first one, having lived in the EU and China, in the EU, at the EU institutions, there's a focus on competences and hierarchy to get the best person within the EU institutions. At the same time, in China, there is a focus on meritocracy as a concept within the legal system, within the institutions. I'm wondering whether you had the opportunity to look at whether these two ideas or approaches sort of help or create sort of common understanding between the EU and China when it comes to shaping relations and law at the same time. The second question, more legal. So we have the EU and China trying to build relations through, let's say, the existing the agreement that is now on hold and trying to find synergies. But at the same time, these two actors are clashing in different places. For instance, China is trying to have a new sort of entrance into the MENA region in terms of law, which clashes with EU law and even US law. How do you see these things happening between building relations but at the same time clashing over other areas and where there's like usual traditional EU law dominance or influence? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the great questions. Absolutely, these are all of the difficult burning questions. So I'm not sure I have very specific answers to these points. I think just on the second two questions, I thank you very much for this. I would absolutely agree with that there are not common understandings of law between the EU and China, and that there are multiple contestations, multiple forums for this for this relationship to play out in all the worst ways. And that I don't pretend that doesn't exist. I mean, clearly there's an enormous amount of exceptionism, if you like. The EU-China developments were almost so successful as to be kind of contrary to the thrust of. Now, if you look at, for example, currently things with Russia, it's very interesting to see how the EU is trying to engage with China in this question. So the broader geopolitics of the relationship can't be put out of account, and I think it would be very difficult to claim that there's any kind of common understanding of law, precisely because the CAI is on hold, precisely because of human rights issues. So that would be naive not to see the failings there. But I think maybe going back then to Giuseppe's question, the first question, I think it is very interesting to trace the evolution from the Belt and Road Initiative to the CAI, because I think people such as myself were trying to argue that it was in breach of sincere cooperation for all the member states to do what they did. And, for example, in Greece and the Greek port, and then to be not voting in human rights matters at the UN. There were some very significant questions there about, impacting upon the EU as a good global actor, Article 21 TEU, impacting upon sincere cooperation, the duty to cooperate. So, it's a very complex relationship, but as I said, I think it's a very interesting one for the fact of studying legalization and institutionalization, because it was hitherto unthinkable that China would sign up to the RCEP, sign up to CPTPP, have a civil code, sign up to agreements of this nature. So I would say it's not the outcome, but it's the process of legalization that's taking effect that is quite interesting. But clearly, I mean, the WTO stuff was, massive acceleration of their legal order, so that, what kind of acceleration do you need of processes for it to legalize further? I don't have the answer, and I don't pretend to be a China, specialist or scholar. I have, my work is on the EU as a global actor, if you like. So I'm thinking from the other perspective. But thank you for the fantastic questions. There's no shortage of issues to study, and thank you very much.
Thanks so much. So if there are no other questions or comments, I don't see them, but let me know. And if there are no other questions or comments, I would like to thank Elaine for this fantastic keynote speech, which I think it is the best manner to start, I mean, our webinar. So now the program includes a 5-minute break. I mean, so I will say that we have time to have a coffee or an Italian coffee or other versions of it, and we will be back in we'll say at 10:30 for the first panel on investments and trade, and the panel will be chaired by Umberto Dattanzi, Bocconi University. And after that, we will have a second panel on climate change and sustainability. So there is a lot of food for discussion. I thank you very much, and I'll see you again in 7 minutes. Okay, so enjoy the small break. Thank you.
Thank you.